If I told you that, at the age of 13, I was buried alive by my own stepfather in a shallow grave in our backyard, you probably wouldn't believe me. But it is the truth. And that was the moment the weak, fearful girl named Elizabeth died, so that another could be reborn from the mud, the tears, and the relentless rain of the Pacific Northwest. Today, at 75 years old, I am not here to dwell on a tragic past. I am here to prove one thing to you. Even when buried in the depths of despair, the flame of life and resilience can burn brighter than ever. My story is not about a victim. This is the story of a warrior. And before we begin this long journey, please subscribe and leave a comment to let me know where you're listening to this story from. Because I believe that pain and strength know no borders. Each of your comments is not just a place name, but an affirmation that all across this world, people are connecting with one another through stories of survival. So that I, and all of us, know that we are never alone in our own battles. My mother. Ah, my mother. It's hard to talk about her without my heart aching. Susan was a beautiful woman. She turned heads wherever she went with her long black hair and the way she swayed her hips when she walked. But it was an empty beauty, without warmth. I never felt a mother's love from her. Not a gentle stroke on the head at bedtime, not a comforting lap when I fell and scraped my knee, not a word of pride when I showed her a drawing I had made in school. "Elizabeth, stop being so clingy. You're like a leech," she would say when I tried to hug her. My dears, at that time, I only felt heartbroken. It took many years for me to understand that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are, in fact, the ones drowning in their own pain of pain. That back then, a child like me could not possibly see. The two of us lived alone until I was 13. She worked as a saleswoman at a department store in the center of town. She earned little, complained a lot. At night, she would often go out all dressed up and only come back in the early hours, smelling of cheap whiskey and cheap perfume. I would stay home alone, afraid of the noises of the night, curling up under the thin sheet, praying for her to come back soon. The house was always my responsibility. Since I was 8, I was already cooking, washing clothes, sweeping, and mopping the floor. If I didn't do it right, I'd get an earful. "You're not even good for taking care of a house, Elizabeth. What's it going to be like when you grow up? No man will want someone so useless." That's how it was. I grew up hearing that I was worthless, that I was a bother, that I was a burden. A child shouldn't hear those things, but I heard them every single day. At school, I was invisible, the quiet girl who knew the answers but never raised her hand. While other children had parents waiting at the gate, I walked alone, a saltine cracker, my only companion. I think that's why I got so attached to Mrs. Hannah, my third-grade teacher. She noticed something was wrong, gave me extra attention, sometimes even gave me a piece of her own lunch. "You are intelligent, Elizabeth. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise," she would tell me. For a while, those words were the only good thing I heard about myself. I kept them deep inside my heart, like someone who guards a precious seed, waiting for the day to plant it. Life was already not easy, but it got much worse when Frank appeared. I was 13 when my mother brought him home for the first time. He was a tall, strong man with a perpetual stubble and a smell of cigarettes that permeated everything around him. He worked as a bouncer at a nightclub, had large, calloused hands, and a way of looking that gave me chills. "This is Frank, my daughter. He's going to live with us now," my mother announced, without even asking what I thought. In the beginning, he even tried to be nice. He brought a sweet treat now and then, asked about school, complimented the food I made, but the mask soon fell. He started by complaining that the house wasn't as clean as he liked, then that the food was bland, then about me existing in the same space as him. "This girl just takes up space and eats what she doesn't help buy," he would say to my mother, as if I weren't right there, hearing everything. And the worst part, my mother agreed. She would shrug, say, "Well, she's a big girl now, she could help more." As if I didn't already do everything in that house. As if it wasn't she who spent money on new lipstick and beer on the weekend. The house, which was already sad before, became a place of fear. Frank had an explosive temper. Anything was a reason to shout, to slam his fist on the table, to break a glass. I lived walking on eggshells, trying to be invisible, to do everything perfectly so as not to give him a reason to get angry. One time, he came home drunk and found a dirty glass I had forgotten in the sink. He took the glass and threw it against the wall, shattering it. Then he pointed his finger in my face. "The next time you leave the house messy, the glass goes on your head, understand?" My mother, who was sitting there in the living room, didn't even look up from the magazine she was flipping through. It was as if it were normal, as if threatening a 13-year-old girl was the most natural thing in the world. That night, I cried softly on my thin mattress on the floor of the small back room. I didn't understand why my mother didn't defend me, why she allowed that man, who wasn't even my father, to treat me that way. Did she not love me even a little bit? Was I so bad that I didn't even deserve protection? It was around this time that I started to take refuge in the small nursery of Mrs. Alice, a lady who lived 2 streets down from our house. It was a corner of peace in that hostile world. Mrs. Alice let me help water the plants, sort seeds, make simple arrangements. In return, she gave me a little money and, more importantly, treated me with kindness. "Girl, you have a green thumb. Look how beautiful this violet is after you started taking care of it," she would say, and my chest would fill with a pride I had never felt before. At Mrs. Alice's nursery, I could be someone different. I wasn't the useless Elizabeth, the one who only caused trouble. I was Elizabeth of the green thumb, the one who made the flowers more beautiful. For a few hours, I forgot about Frank, about my cold mother, about the house that felt more like a prison. But the peace was short-lived. I always had to go back home, and with each passing day, the atmosphere there got worse. Frank drank more, shouted more, broke more things. My mother, in turn, seemed to wilt like a flower without water. The sparkle in her eyes faded. The sway in her walk disappeared, replaced by a tired shuffling of feet. Sometimes, late at night, I would hear her crying in her room. Other times, I would hear the unmistakable sound of a slap on the face, followed by her apology. I wanted to help, but what could a skinny 13-year-old girl do against a man the size of Frank? The last straw came on a Wednesday night. I was washing the dinner dishes. My mother and Frank were still at the table, he drinking whiskey straight from the bottle. My hands were shaking with nervousness. He had already complained about the food, said the rice was raw, that the meat was tough. I knew I was treading on dangerous ground. That's when it happened. A plate slipped from my soapy hands and shattered on the floor. The sound seemed to echo through the whole house, and for a second, everything was silent. Then came the sound of the chair being dragged back violently. "You useless brat." Frank came towards me in 3 long strides, grabbed my hair, and pulled my head back, forcing me to look into his eyes. Bloodshot eyes, red with rage and alcohol. "If you break anything else in this house, you'll get the biggest beating of your life, you hear me, you little bitch?" Tears streamed down my face, but I couldn't make a sound. Fear had frozen my voice. I looked at my mother, silently begging for help. "Do you know what she did?" She gave a nervous little laugh and said, "She's clumsy, just like her father was." It was the only time I ever heard her compare anything about me to my father, and it was to humiliate me, to agree with the monster who was pulling my hair until my scalp burned. I know, hearing this, many of you must feel outraged, unable to understand. How could a mother do that? Fear, my dears, fear has a terrible power. It can turn a mother into a stranger right in her own home.
Oh my gosh, I can't imagine how Elizabeth felt in that moment, to be betrayed by her own mother in the most painful way, right when she needed her most. Susan's words were like a knife straight into that fragile heart. And sadly, this was only the beginning of the nightmare to come.
Frank let me go with a shove that made me hit my back against the sink. He went back to the table, grabbed the whiskey bottle, and went out to the porch, muttering about children who only cause trouble and I should have gotten rid of her a long time ago. I finished washing the dishes with trembling hands and a heart beating so fast it felt like it would jump out of my Proust chest. That night, lying on my mattress, I made a promise to myself. One day, I would leave that house. One day, I would be free. One day, I would find people who would treat me with love, with respect. What I didn't know was that one day was still far away, and that before it came, I would go through the most terrible moment of my life. A moment that would begin with a simple wet floor and end with dirt covering my body in a shallow grave in our backyard. But that, my dears, is a story for later in the video. A story of terror, but also of courage, of how a scared little girl found within herself the strength to survive the unimaginable. The week after that incident with the broken plate was a true hell. Frank seemed to have discovered a new pleasure in terrorizing me. Every time I entered a room where he was, I felt those small eyes following me, like a predator studying its prey. I started to do everything with even more care, checking 3 times before putting anything on the table, cleaning every corner of the house until it shone. My mother, who before at least pretended not to notice what was happening, now began to imitate his behavior. She complained about my messy hair, my simple clothes, the way I spoke. "That posture, girl, you look like a hunchback," she would say while I was washing clothes, bent over the wash basin. "And wash Frank's shirt properly. Last time it was stained." It was as if a shadow had fallen over our house. The little light that still existed had been completely extinguished. It was on a rainy Friday that everything got worse. The sky over Cedar Creek had been overcast since morning, the kind of heavy Pacific Northwest rain that feels like it's going to swallow the world. The humidity penetrated everything, the walls, the clothes hanging on the line, even our bones. I had just finished mopping the living room floor when Frank arrived from work, soaked and in a bad mood. "What's that musty smell?" he complained as soon as he stepped inside. "It's the rain," I answered softly, already backing away towards the kitchen. "Everything's wet outside." He muttered something I didn't understand and went to the bedroom to change. I took the opportunity to finish cleaning the hallway that led to the bedrooms, quickly running the wet mop over it. I was in a hurry. I wanted to finish quickly before he came back. Maybe that's why I didn't wring out the mop properly, leaving the floor wetter than it should have been. Sure enough, Frank came out of the room, stomping as he always did, and as soon as his foot hit the hallway, he slipped. He didn't fall completely. He caught himself on the wall, but it was enough to awaken that fury I knew so well. "You imbecile! Are you trying to kill me?" he bellowed, his face red with rage. "You can't even mop a floor right!" I dropped the bucket and ran to the backyard, thinking that maybe outside, with the rain and the neighbors nearby, he wouldn't dare hit me. A foolish mistake. Frank came after me like an enraged bull. "Get back here. I'm not done talking to you." I stood still under the maple tree, the fine rain soaking me completely, trembling not from cold, but from fear. Frank stopped at the back door, looking at the overcast sky as if deciding whether it was worth getting wet to come after me. "Fine," he said finally, with a calmness that scared me more than his shouts. "Stay there, but don't say I didn't warn you." And he went back inside, leaving me there, soaked and confused. What did he mean by that? Through the kitchen window, I saw him say something to my mother, who just nodded her head without question. Then he went out again, this time through the front door, disappearing down the street. I stayed in the backyard for almost an hour, afraid to go in. When I finally worked up the courage, my mother was sitting at the kitchen table, smoking one cigarette after another. "Mom, what is Frank going to do to me?" I asked, my voice almost disappearing with fear. She took a long drag before answering, without looking into my eyes. "If I were you, I'd pack my things and disappear from here before he gets back." My heart froze. "Are you kicking me out of the house?" "I'm not kicking you out of anything. I'm just saying he's very angry, and you know how he gets when he's like this." "But I have nowhere to go," I protested, tears already blurring my vision. She shrugged, as if that wasn't her problem. "Go to that old lady's house from the nursery you like so much, then." In that moment, I understood that I was completely alone. My own mother was throwing me to the wolves, washing her hands of what might happen to me. I ran to my little room, grabbed my school backpack, and put inside the few important things I had: a change of clothes, my class picture, and a small, worn prayer card that Mrs. Alice had given me. I was about to leave through the back door when I heard the sound of Frank's pickup truck parking in front of the house. I froze. It was too late. Through the window, I saw him get out of the truck, carrying something long and heavy. It took me a few seconds to understand what it was. A shovel. A large shovel for digging. The terror I felt in that moment is indescribable. My legs went weak, my stomach turned, my mouth went dry. Why had he brought a shovel? What did he intend to do? I hid under the kitchen table, like I used to when I was little and afraid of thunderstorms. I heard him come in, slamming the door shut. "Where is she?" he asked my mother. "In her room, I think." His heavy footsteps approached, and soon his legs appeared in my field of vision. He bent down, his face appearing under the tablecloth, a malicious smile on his lips. "Found you. Get out of there, you pest." Reluctantly, I crawled out from my hiding place. He grabbed my arm forcefully, dragging me out of the house, into the backyard. The rain had intensified, falling in thick sheets now. "You're going to learn to respect me now," he said through gritted teeth, pushing me to the farthest corner of the yard, where the trees created dense shadows even during the day. It was then that I saw it. A large, rectangular hole dug in the soft earth of the backyard. It looked like a grave. "No, please," I begged, trying to break free, scratching his arm with my nails. "I didn't mean it, I swear. The floor was wet because of the rain." Frank just laughed, a guttural sound that had nothing human in it. With a strong push, he threw me into the hole. I landed on my back in the damp earth, the impact knocking the wind out of me. Before I could recover, he jumped into the hole too. What happened in the next few minutes is something I have tried to block from my memory for decades. Even now, at 75, there are details my mind refuses to fully access. Trauma has a way of fragmenting memory, breaking it into pieces that don't quite fit together. What I remember clearly is the dissociation, how my consciousness seemed to float above my body, watching from a safe distance as if it were happening to someone else. It's a survival mechanism I would later study extensively in my career, but in that moment, it was the only thing that kept my sanity intact. His large hands tearing my blouse, touching where no one should touch a 13-year-old girl. His heavy breathing on my face, the smell of whiskey and cigarettes choking me. The disgusting words whispered in my ear, promises of what he would do to me if I screamed, if I told anyone. I closed my eyes and transported myself far away. In my mind, I was at Mrs. Alice's nursery, among the colorful flowers, the sweet smell of jasmine in the air, gentle hands teaching me how to make a beautiful arrangement. It was the only way to survive that moment, to leave my body there but send my soul to a safe place. When he finished, he got out of the hole, panting, adjusting his belt. He looked down at me, curled up, dirty with earth and tears, and smiled. "Now you're going to stay there and think about what you've done." And then, to my absolute horror, he started to throw dirt on top of me. "Stop!" I screamed, panic giving me strength I didn't know I had. "You're going to kill me!" "Shut up. I'm not going to bury you completely. Yet, just enough for you to learn your lesson." He continued throwing dirt, covering my legs, my stomach. When it reached my neck, he stopped. He looked satisfied with his work, and then said in a casual tone, as if commenting on the weather, "Tomorrow morning, I'll come get you out. If you've learned to be a good girl, maybe I'll let you keep living in this house. If not," he left the sentence hanging in the air, the implied threat more terrifying than any word. And then he was gone, leaving me there, buried up to my neck in a hole in the backyard, with the fine rain falling on my face, mixing with the tears that wouldn't stop streaming. I screamed for help a few times, but the rain muffled my voice. Besides, our house was on a large lot, set back from the others. No one would hear me. No one would come to save me. And my mother? Where was she while all this was happening? I looked at the kitchen window and saw her there, standing, watching. For a moment, our eyes met, and I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in hers. But then she closed the curtain, choosing once again not to see, not to act, not to protect me. For many years, the image of that curtain haunted me. It was the ultimate symbol of abandonment. It wasn't until much later that I learned that behind that curtain wasn't cruelty, but the helplessness of someone who was also a prisoner. But on that rainy night, to a 13-year-old girl, it felt as though the entire world had turned its back on her.
That curtain. What a truly haunting image. In that moment, 13-year-old Elizabeth's world completely shattered. Abandoned, buried in darkness and despair. Is there any hope for her after this night? Let's keep listening to see just how extraordinary the power of human survival can be.
That wasn't an empty promise, my dears. It was an oath written in mud and tears. At that very moment, I decided that my story would not end in a hole in the backyard. And I believe that each of us has a moment like that, a moment to decide if we will be a victim or a survivor.
Here it is. This is the moment we've been waiting for. From the depths of despair, a fire has been lit. The scared little girl from yesterday died in that hole, and a warrior has just risen. From this moment on, the story is no longer about endurance, but about resistance, and her plan is going to make you hold your breath.
I sat on the edge of the mattress, ideas beginning to organize in my mind. If I wanted to survive, I would need to be stronger, more determined than I had ever been. And the first thing to do was to ensure I had enough time to escape when the time came. I then remembered the pills my mother took to sleep. She kept a strip in the kitchen drawer for the nights when insomnia attacked her. If I could put some in their breakfast, the plan began to take shape in my head, each detail fitting together like pieces of a puzzle. It was risky, dangerous even, but what was my alternative? To stay and wait for Frank's next punishment, which could very well be my death sentence number. This would be my only chance, and I would not waste it. With this determination, born of desperation, I got up and went to the kitchen. It was time to prepare a special breakfast for my mother and my stepfather. A breakfast that would give them a deep sleep and give me the freedom I so longed for. The scared girl who entered that grave no longer existed. In her place, someone new was emerging, someone willing to do anything to survive. And the first step of this new Elizabeth would be taken the next morning, with a plan that would change my life forever. It was still dawn when I began to prepare that breakfast. My hands were trembling, but my mind was clearer than ever. The clock on the wall showed 6:15 a.m. when I lit the stove. Usually, Frank and my mother woke up around 7:30, which gave me enough time. First, I prepared everything as usual. The strong coffee Frank liked, the scrambled eggs, the bread I baked myself twice a week. I wanted it to seem like a normal day, so they wouldn't suspect anything. While the water for the coffee was boiling, I went to the drawer where my mother kept her medicines. The strip of sleeping pills was there, hidden under boxes of Band-Aids and ointments. I looked at those small, white pills, my heart beating so hard I thought it would wake the whole house. How many should I use? I didn't want to kill them. As bad as she was still my mother. I just needed them to sleep long enough for me to get out and find help. I remembered watching my mother take these pills many times when she couldn't sleep. She would take 1, sometimes 2 on really bad nights. With shaking hands, I crushed 3 pills. I didn't know the right amount. I just prayed it would be enough to make them sleep deeply without causing serious harm. I mixed the powder into the sugar bowl, my heart pounding with fear and desperation. My mother always put a lot of sugar in her coffee. Frank drank his black but sweetened the orange juice he drank right after. It was risky, but it was my only chance. At 7:25, I heard the sound of the shower. Frank always showered first. My mother usually stayed in bed for a few more minutes before getting up. I set the table, the cups, the plates, everything perfectly arranged as he demanded. When Frank entered the kitchen, dressed for work, I forced a smile. "Good morning? Coffee's ready." He looked at me suspiciously, probably expecting to find a crying girl begging to be let out of the hole in the backyard. Instead, there I was, apparently submissive, preparing breakfast as if nothing had happened. He grunted, sitting at the table. "Looks like a night in the hole taught you something after all." I didn't answer, just served his coffee, black, no sugar, as he liked. Then I prepared the orange juice, putting a generous amount of sugar, the sugar mixed with the crushed pills. My mother appeared soon after, her hair still wet from the shower. She looked like she had aged 10 years that night. There were deep dark circles under her eyes, and she avoided looking directly at me. "Good morning, Mom," I said, trying to sound normal. "Want some coffee?" She nodded without saying anything, and sat at the table. I served her cup, watching as she added 2 heaping spoonfuls of the doctored sugar. The next few minutes were the longest of my life. I stood by the stove, pretending to wipe the counter, while watching them out of the corner of my eye. Every sip they took was like a small victory for me. Every time the liquid touched their lips, I was closer to freedom. Frank finished first, pushing his empty plate away and drinking the orange juice in large, thirsty gulps. Then he got up, grabbed the key to his pickup truck, and said, "I'll be back later. And you, young lady, this house better be spotless when I get back." I nodded obediently, avoiding his eyes. He left, slamming the door. From the sound of the engine, I realized the truck didn't start at first. He tried again, cursing loudly. On the third try, the engine finally sputtered to life, and he drove off. I was alone with my mother, who was now washing her cup in the sink. Her hands seemed heavy, her movement slow. The medicine was already starting to take effect. "I'm going to lie down for a bit," she said, her voice slurred. "I'm feeling strange." "Okay, Mom, get some rest." She staggered to her room, and I waited, counting the minutes. 10 minutes later, I went to her room and found her sleeping deeply, her breathing heavy and regular. I tested it by calling her name, then gently shook her shoulder. Nothing. She was completely out. Now was my chance. I had started toward my room when I heard a car door slam outside. Through the window, I saw Frank's truck parked crookedly in the driveway. My blood ran cold. He must have felt drowsy while driving and pulled over somewhere nearby. When he felt worse, his instinct was to come home rather than risk an accident. Even in his drugged state, his self-preservation was strong.
My heart just stopped. Just when you thought the plan had failed with Frank's return, it turned out to be an unbelievable stroke of luck. Now, both monsters are fast asleep, and the door to freedom is wide open for Elizabeth. Will she manage to escape and find help?
The words got stuck in my throat. Now that I was here, face to face with an authority figure, the fear came rushing back. What if Frank found out? What if he came after me? What if no one believed me? "Miss," the officer insisted, more gently this time. "You're hurt. We can help, but you need to tell us what happened." I took a deep breath, feeling hot tears streaming down my face. It was now or never. "My stepfather," I began, my voice trembling. He hurt me. He buried me in the backyard." The officer blinked a few times, as if he hadn't understood correctly. "Buried you? What do you mean?" And then, like a dam breaking, the words started to pour out. I told him everything, from the beginning. How Frank had appeared in our lives, how he started to mistreat me, how my mother never defended me. I told him about the broken plate, about the wet floor, about the hole in the backyard. I told him, my voice choked with sobs, what he had done to me in that hole before throwing dirt on me and leaving me there all night. As I spoke, more officers gathered around, listening in shocked silence. A female officer was called, and she sat next to me, holding my hand as I continued my account. When I finished, showing them the pictures I had taken of the hole and my injuries, the silence in the room was heavy, palpable. "Where is he now?" asked the first officer, his voice hard, restrained. "At home. He and my mother are sleeping. I put sleeping pills in their coffee." One of the officers let out a low whistle of surprise. The female officer beside me squeezed my hand tighter. "You are a very brave girl," she said. "You did the right thing coming here." I didn't feel brave. I felt small, scared, lost. But something in those words lit a spark inside me. Maybe I was brave after all. Maybe I was stronger than I ever imagined. "We're sending a car over there right now," said the officer who seemed to be the chief. "James, call Child Protective Services. The girl will need a place to stay."
Finally, justice is speaking up. The female officer's words are truly a salvation, a validation that Elizabeth has longed for. But are you curious what the police will discover at that house? The truth is even more horrifying than what Elizabeth described, and it will completely change our perspective on her mother.
The events of the following hours blurred into a whirlwind of emotions and activities. I was taken to a doctor's office, where a gray-haired doctor examined my injuries, took photos for what he called a forensic report, and asked delicate questions about the abuse I had suffered. A social worker appeared, a woman with a calm voice and kind eyes, explaining that I would be temporarily under the state's care until my situation was resolved. Later, I learned that when the police arrived at my house several hours later, they had to get a warrant first. They found Frank and my mother beginning to wake up, groggy and disoriented. The sleeping pills had worn off somewhat, but they were still confused enough that Frank's first instinct was to lash out. But the most shocking thing was that as soon as the officers entered, Frank woke up startled and, realizing what was happening, attacked one of the officers. In the ensuing confusion, they discovered something that explained a lot about my stepfather's behavior: packets of cocaine hidden in the ceiling panels, an illegal gun under the mattress. Frank wasn't just a violent man, he was a trafficker, a criminal who used our house as a front for his shady business. And my mother, when she finally woke up, surrounded by police officers, began to cry desperately, saying that she was afraid of him, that he threatened her, that he forced her to participate in his schemes. She told them how the abuse had started slowly, first just harsh words, then a shove here and there, escalating over months until she was completely under his control. She revealed bruises I had never seen, hidden under long sleeves even in summer. She spoke of threats he made not just against her, but against extended family members, against me. The police found evidence of stalking behavior from before they even lived together. He had targeted her, a vulnerable single mother, deliberately. It was in that moment, hearing the social worker's account of my mother's desperation, that I began to understand something painful. She was also a victim. A different kind of victim than me, a victim who had failed to protect her own daughter, but a victim nonetheless. The hatred I felt for her slowly began to transform into something more complex, a mixture of pity, disappointment, and, surprisingly, a hesitant desire for understanding. I spent that night in a shelter on the outskirts of Seattle. It was a simple place, but clean and safe. There were other children there, with stories as painful as, or even more so than mine. Lying in a bunk bed, listening to the breathing of the other girls in the room, I thought about how my life had completely changed in just 24 hours. From being buried in a hole, to being saved by the police. From a prisoner to being free. I fell asleep with a strange feeling in my chest. It wasn't happiness. There was still too much pain and fear there. But it was something close to hope. The hope that maybe the worst was over, that from now on, things could only get better. What I didn't know, lying in that bunk bed, was that fate still had many surprises in store for me, that my journey was far from over. That I would meet my mother again under circumstances I could never have imagined. And that against all odds, I would find not only safety, but also a purpose in life, a purpose born from the very pain that almost destroyed me. But that, my dears, is a story for another time in this long journey that has been my life. A story of new beginnings, revelations, and finally, redemption. The days following my escape were a roller coaster of emotions. I spent 2 weeks in that shelter in Seattle, sleeping in a narrow bunk bed, sharing meals with children whose eyes were as lost as mine. Some talked about their stories openly, as if sharing the pain helped to carry the weight. Others, like me, preferred silence, still trying to understand what had happened to our lives. The social worker, Miss Rebecca, came to visit me regularly. She was the one who brought me the first news about Frank and my mother. On a rainy afternoon in May, as we walked through the institution's small garden, she said, "Your stepfather will be in prison for a very long time. Elizabeth." She held a flowered umbrella over us. "Besides what he did to you, they found a lot of evidence of his crimes. Trafficking, illegal weapons, assaults." I felt immense relief hearing that. The idea that Frank could get out, find me, and take revenge had been a constant nightmare in my sleepless nights. "And my mother?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Miss?" Rebecca sighed, adjusting the glasses that always slipped down her thin nose. "Your mother is in a complicated situation. She's not in jail, but she's facing charges for negligence and omission. She's undergoing psychological treatment, and, well, she asked to see you." I stopped walking, feeling as if the ground had disappeared from under my feet. "See my mother?" After everything that had happened? The woman who stood by and watched as I was buried alive? I don't want to, I replied automatically. I don't ever want to see her again. Miss Rebecca didn't insist that day, nor in the following ones. But she always brought news of how my mother was attending all the therapy sessions, how she had gotten a job at a diner, how she was fighting to prove she could raise me properly. Susan is trying, Elizabeth, Miss Rebecca would say. People can change when they have the chance. I didn't believe it. How could someone who allowed such atrocities against her own daughter change? It was easier to hold on to the hatred, the resentment. It was safer. It was at the end of the 3rd week that something unexpected happened. I was sitting in the cafeteria, unenthusiastically stirring a bowl of oatmeal, when Miss Rebecca appeared, accompanied by a man I had never seen before. He was a man of about 60, with completely white hair, wearing a simple but well-pressed suit. Elizabeth, this is Chief Dennis. He's handling the case involving your stepfather and would like to talk to you. The chief sat across from me, his face serious but kind. He explained that he needed to ask me some additional questions, things that would help ensure Frank stayed in prison for the maximum amount of time. It was a difficult conversation. I had to relive details of that terrible night, explain again the threats, the abuse. But then, when I thought we were finished, the chief took a thick folder from his briefcase. There's something you need to know, Elizabeth. Something about your mother and Frank that we discovered during the investigation. He opened the folder and began to show me documents, photos, medical reports. As he explained, my world turned upside down once again. My mother wasn't just a passive accomplice in Frank's crimes. She was a terrified victim. The photos showed old bruises on her body, cigarette burn marks on her back, an arm that had been broken and had healed poorly. The medical reports documented recurring visits to the clinic, always with different excuses for the injuries. We found this hidden in your house, said the chief, showing me a faded, blue-covered notebook. It's your mother's diary. She had been documenting the abuse for months but was too afraid to report it. I flipped through that notebook with trembling hands. My mother's rushed handwriting covered pages and pages, reporting horrors I never imagined were happening inside that house. How Frank beat her when I was at school. How he threatened to kill both her and me if she tried to escape or ask for help. How she had tried to escape once, only to be found and dragged back by his friends who seemed to be everywhere in town. And then, on the last page, an entry from the day I was buried in the backyard. He buried her. My God, he buried my daughter. I just stood there watching, too much of a coward to do anything. If I scream, he'll kill us both. If I run for help, he'll finish burying her before I get back. I'm trapped in a dead end. May God forgive me for what I allowed to happen to my girl. May God forgive me for not having the courage that she has.
Unbelievable. It turns out behind Susan's silence was another horrifying story, a torture no one knew about. These words don't erase her faults, but they show that she was also a trapped victim. This makes the upcoming meeting between mother and daughter all the more complex and anticipated.
Tears streamed down my face as I read those words. They weren't excuses. They didn't erase what had happened. But they showed me something I hadn't been able to see before. My mother, just as trapped as I was in that house of horrors, only with different chains. You see, my dears, life isn't always about clear-cut good guys and bad guys. Sometimes, there are just broken people, trying to survive in any way they can. Understanding doesn't erase the pain, but it opens a path to healing, no matter how rugged that path may be. Why did she never tell? I asked the chief, my voice choked with emotion. Why did she never ask for help? Fear does terrible things to people, Elizabeth. Your stepfather had connections with dangerous criminals. Your mother genuinely believed you would both be killed if she tried to escape. We were silent for a moment, the weight of these revelations hanging between us like a dense cloud. Then the chief continued, There's one more thing you should know. Frank wasn't just any trafficker. He was the main drug distributor in the Cedar Creek area. He used your house as a front and you and your mother as shields. No one would suspect a family man. I thought of all the times Frank had friends over, the whispered conversations on the porch, the bags that appeared and disappeared mysteriously. It all made sense now. When you reported him, Elizabeth, you didn't just save yourself. You helped dismantle a trafficking network that was destroying families all over the region. You are braver than you think. I returned to the shelter that day with my head spinning. The revelations had turned my world upside down. The hatred I felt for my mother began to transform into something more complex, more painful, more human. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the beginning of an understanding. A week later, I finally agreed to see her. The meeting took place in a small room at the Seattle courthouse, with Miss Rebecca present as a supervisor. When my mother entered, I almost didn't recognize her. She was thinner, her face marked by deep, dark circles, her hair without its former shine. But there was something different in her eyes, a clarity I had never seen before. We were silent for long seconds, just looking at each other. Then, without warning, she fell to her knees before me, sobbing. "Forgive me, my child. For God's sake, forgive me for not protecting you." I couldn't answer. A part of me wanted to scream, to accuse, to throw in her face every moment of pain I had endured while she watched. Another part just wanted to hug her and cry with her, two survivors of the same shipwreck. What I did in the end was extend my hand and touch her shoulder. A simple gesture, neither forgiveness nor rejection. Just acknowledgement. We are here, we survived. And now, what do we do with that? That touch, my dears, it wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that we were both survivors of the same storm, and to rebuild anything, we had to start from the rubble, together. Sometimes, healing doesn't begin with a grand statement, but with a small gesture just like that.
A small gesture, but it carries the weight of 1,000 pounds. That touch is the start of a difficult but hopeful journey of healing. Can these two broken souls build a new future together? Let's see what unexpected turns life has in store for them next.
In the following months, our relationship began to be rebuilt, brick by brick. It wasn't easy. There were days when the anger came back with full force, when I refused to answer her calls or attend the supervised meetings. There were days when she also retreated, overwhelmed by guilt, by shame. But there were also moments of genuine connection. Like when she brought an old photo album and showed me, for the first time, a picture of my father, a thin man with a shy smile, holding a guitar. "He played at the town parties," she said. "That's how we met. He died before he knew you existed, but he would have loved you so much, Elizabeth." Or when I confessed that I dreamed of finishing my studies, maybe even going to college one day, and I saw a glint of genuine pride in her eyes. "You were always the smart one in the family," she said. "You'll achieve anything you want in life." After 6 months of intensive psychological treatment, supervised visits, and constant evaluations from Child Protective Services, my mother finally received permission to take me back home. Not to the same house where the horrors happened, that one had been sold to pay for lawyers and debts left by Frank. It was a new place, a tiny apartment in a housing project on the outskirts of Seattle. 2 cramped rooms, simple furniture donated by charities, but it was ours. And more importantly, it was safe. "We're going to start over," my mother promised on the day I moved in. Just the two of us, building something better. It wasn't a fairy tale. Life was hard. My mother worked 2 jobs to pay the rent and keep food on the table. I went back to school, trying to make up for lost time, facing the curious stares and whispers of classmates who knew fragments of my story. At night, I still had nightmares about the hole in the backyard, about large hands holding me down, about dirt covering my face. Sometimes I woke up screaming, and my mother would come running, hugging me until the images dissipated. She had her own demons, too. Sometimes I would catch her crying silently while washing dishes or folding clothes. Other times, she would get startled by loud noises, as if expecting Frank to appear at any moment. We were 2 broken people trying to glue the pieces of each other back together. Imperfect, painful, but genuine. It was during this period that I discovered something about my mother I had never imagined. She dreamed of being a nurse. She had even started the course before getting pregnant with me, but dropped out when financial difficulties arose. I always wanted to take care of people, she told me one night as we ate ramen noodles at our makeshift little table. I think that's why it hurts so much, not being able to take care of you properly. It's never too late to start over, I replied, surprised by my own words. The next day, I brought home pamphlets from a nursing program at a community college that accepted scholarship students. Her eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. It was the first step on a journey that, without us knowing it then, would completely change our lives. In the next 2 years, our life found a new rhythm. My mother studied at night after long days as a waitress. I dedicated myself to school, determined to get high enough grades to get a scholarship in the future. On weekends, we cleaned houses together for extra income. Slowly, the wounds began to heal. They didn't disappear completely. They never would. But we learned to live with them, to transform them into something that strengthened us instead of destroying us. It was during one of these weekend cleaning jobs that we met the family that would change the course of our history again. Dr. Genevieve, a respected psychiatrist from Seattle, and her husband, Dr. Samuel, who taught at the medical school. They treated us with a respect we had never experienced before, always offering fresh water, sometimes even inviting us to lunch after we finished our work. I was 16 then, and Dr. Genevieve soon noticed my interest in the books that filled the shelves of her house. One day, she caught me flipping through a volume on psychology. "Are you interested in this?" she asked. "Very much," I replied shyly. "I think after everything I've been through, I want to understand how the mind works, why people do what they do." It was the beginning of a mentorship I could never have imagined. Dr. Genevieve started lending me books, inviting me to lectures at the university, talking to me about cases she handled without revealing identities, of course. When I mentioned my dream of studying psychology one day, but my fear of never being able to afford college, she smiled. "There are scholarships, Elizabeth. With your school record and your life story, you have a great chance, and I'm going to help you get one." And she helped, more than I could have ever dreamed. But that's a part of the story that is yet to come. The story of how a girl who was buried alive managed not only to survive, but to flourish. The story of how pain can be transformed into purpose, and how the worst moments of our lives can surprisingly lead us to the best. The year 1970 marked a complete turning point in my life. I had just turned 20 and was holding an envelope in my hands that would change my destiny forever. The acceptance letter to the psychology department at the University of Washington, with a full scholarship. When I read that letter, sitting in our small kitchen in Seattle, I cried like a child. They were not tears of sadness, like so many I had shed throughout my life, but of an almost unbearable joy. "I got in, Mom," I shouted, showing the paper to my mother, who had just arrived from the hospital where she worked as a nurse's aide. "I'm going to be a psychologist." She dropped her bag on the floor and hugged me tightly, sobbing along with me. In that hug, there was so much pride, redemption, the promise of a future that neither of us would have dared to dream of years ago, when we were trapped in that house of horrors in Cedar Creek. The path to get there had not been easy. After we met Dr. Genevieve and Dr. Samuel, our lives began to change gradually. With their help, I got a scholarship to finish high school at a better school. My mother completed her nursing program and got a job at the county hospital, earning a salary that, for the first time, allowed us more than just to survive. We still lived in the same small apartment, but now it had colorful curtains, a bookshelf full of books many borrowed from Dr. Genevieve, and even a black and white television that we bought on a 12-month payment plan. On the walls, instead of the bare plaster, we had pasted floral wallpaper, hiding the damp stains. They were small luxuries, but they symbolized how far we had come. Dr. Genevieve became more than a mentor to me. She was almost a second mother. She spent hours helping me study for the SATs, lent me books that went far beyond the school curriculum, and took me to lectures and debates at the university. When I confessed my specific interest in psychological trauma and recovery, she introduced me to specialist colleagues in the field, broadening my horizons. "You have something that many psychologists will never have, Elizabeth," she told me one day as we walked through the hospital corridors where I was doing a volunteer internship. "You have lived through trauma. You know the pain from the inside. This will give you an empathy and an understanding that no book can teach." Those words stuck with me. For the first time, I saw my traumatic experience not just as a scar, but as a powerful tool I could use to help others. My pain could have a purpose. When I finally entered the university, I dove into my studies with an insatiable thirst. I devoured books, participated in every study group, and asked questions that sometimes even left the professors thoughtful. Some classmates found me intensely serious, almost obsessed. They didn't understand that for me, every class, every theory, every concept was a piece in the puzzle of my own recovery. Freud, Jung, Skinner, Roger Sach of these theorists offered me different lenses to look not only at the future of the patients I would one day treat, but at my own past. I began to understand the mechanisms of fear, dissociation, and post-traumatic stress. I began to give names to the monsters that still occasionally visited my dreams. In my second year of college, something unexpected happened. Dr. Genevieve invited me to accompany her on a pilot project she was developing, a support group for women victims of domestic violence. Not as a therapist, of course, I was still just a student, but as an observer, someone who could learn and practice. "I think it will be good for them, and for you," she said, with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see through all my defenses. My first day in that group changed my life forever. Sitting in a circle with 8 women of different ages and stories, I heard accounts that painfully echoed my own experience. One had been beaten by her husband for 10 years before managing to escape. Another had been abused by her uncle since childhood, with the complicit silence of the family. A third had tried to report her violent partner 3 times, but the police never did anything. I remained silent most of the time, observing, absorbing. But at the end of the session, an older lady with cigarette burn marks on her arms, so similar to the ones my mother had, looked directly at me. "And you, girl? What's your story?" I felt Dr. Genevieve's gaze on me, not pressing, just supporting. I took a deep breath, and for the first time outside of a controlled therapy or investigation setting, I told my story. I told them about Frank, about the hole in the backyard, about my mother paralyzed by fear, about the night buried under the rain, about the escape plan. When I finished, the silence in the room was dense, almost palpable. Then, one by one, those women got up and hugged me. There was no pity in their eyes. There was recognition, solidarity, the deep connection of those who know the same pain. "You survived," said the lady with the burns, holding my hands between hers. "And you're here, studying, rebuilding yourself? It gives me hope that my granddaughter can also have a future, even after everything she saw in that house." I left that session transformed. Dr. Genevieve, with her silent wisdom, knew exactly what she was doing by taking me there. It wasn't just for me to learn, it was for me to realize that my story, as painful as it was, could be a light for other women in similar situations. From that day on, my path in psychology became clear. I would be a therapist specializing in trauma, focusing especially on women and children, victims of violence. Every course, every internship, every reading I did from then on was directed towards this goal. In my last year of college, I met David, a psychiatry student who attended some of the interdisciplinary seminars I was also taking. He was a quiet young man with kind eyes and always clean hands, something I noticed immediately, perhaps in contrast to Frank's hands, which were always dirty with dirt and grease. David had a sharp intelligence, but also a rare sensitivity among the men I knew. Our friendship began with discussions about clinical cases, debates about therapeutic approaches, and exchanges of articles and books. Gradually, it transformed into something more. It took me a long time to trust, to lower the walls I had built around my heart. But David was patient, respecting my time, my limits, never pressuring me. When I finally told him my whole story one starry night on the shores of Lake Union, he didn't show horror, disgust, or bitter reactions I so feared. Instead, he held my hand and simply said, "Thank you for trusting me with this. You are the strongest person I've ever met." It was in that moment that I knew I could love him. Not with the desperate, dependent love I saw in so many traumatized women, but with a mature, conscious, chosen love. We graduated in the same year, me in psychology, he in medicine, already headed for a residency in psychiatry. 2 years later, we got married in a simple ceremony in the flowery backyard of Dr. Genevieve and Dr. Samuel's house, who had become a second family to us. My mother, now a trained and respected nurse at the hospital where she worked, cried throughout the entire ceremony. It was a different kind of crying than I was used to note of pain or fear, but of a deep joy mixed perhaps with relief. Her daughter, whom she had once failed to protect, was now building a full life with a good man by her side. Our life together began modestly, but full of purpose. David started his residency in psychiatry, and I got a position at a non-profit organization that worked with vulnerable women. The salary was low, but the work filled me in a way nothing else could. In 1976, at the age of 26, I defended my master's thesis in clinical psychology with a dissertation on resilience in survivors of severe trauma. The examining committee, composed of renowned professors, was impressed with the depth of the work, not knowing that much of what I wrote came not only from academic research, but from my own journey of healing. It was in that same year that I discovered I was pregnant with our first child. The news brought joy, but also a fear I hadn't expected to feel. Would I be able to protect this child? Would I know how to be a good mother, having had such a flawed example? What if the traumas of my past affected my ability to mother? David, with his usual calm, helped me navigate these fears. We started couples therapy, not because we were having problems, but as preparation for parenthood. We wanted to enter this new phase with our eyes open, aware of our own traumas and triggers. Michael was born on a rainy April morning in 1977, after a difficult but transformative birth. When I held him to my chest for the first time, something blossomed inside me, a love so immense, so fierce, it almost hurt. In that moment, I made a silent promise. This boy would never know the kind of fear that dominated my childhood. He would be protected, loved, and respected for his individuality. 2 years later, Emily came along, our daughter with curious eyes and an easy smile. Our family was complete, our small circle of love and security established in a world I knew to be often cruel. Balancing motherhood with a career was not easy, especially in an era when women were expected to prioritize the home above all else. But David was a partner in the fullest sense of the word, sharing responsibilities equally, supporting my professional projects, creating space for me to follow my calling while also being a mother. In 1983, with the children already in school, I took the step I had long dreamed of. I opened my own clinic specializing in psychological trauma, with a special focus on women and children, victims of violence. It started small, just me and a colleague from the nonprofit where I had worked, in a rented room in downtown Seattle. The distinguishing feature of our approach was that we never charged women who couldn't pay. We established a system where higher-income patients subsidized the treatment of the less fortunate. We didn't get rich with this model, but we managed to help hundreds of women who otherwise would never have had access to quality psychological treatment. It was in this clinic that I developed what would later be known as the Elizabeth Method, a specific therapeutic approach for complex trauma, combining techniques from different psychological schools with practices I developed myself from my personal and professional experience. The work grew, gained recognition. I began to be invited to give lectures, workshops, and training for mental health professionals. I wrote articles, then a book that became a reference in the field. The girl who was once buried alive in a backyard in Cedar Creek was now a respected authority on the treatment of psychological trauma. But professional recognition, as gratifying as it was never what mattered most to me. What really moved me were the eyes of the women we treated. Watching them go from paralyzing fear to cautious hope, and finally to a renewed strength. It was witnessing their journeys from victims to survivors, and finally to whole people, rediscovering their own voice, their own power. While our clinic grew, my mother faced her own challenges. In 1988, she began to show the first signs of something we didn't immediately understand: forgetfulness, confusion, mood swings. For a few months, we attributed it to work stress, to advancing age. But when she forgot how to get home after visiting my house, a path she took almost weekly, we knew it was something more serious. The diagnosis came like a blow: early onset Alzheimer's. She was only 52. The doctors explained it was a rare genetic form, likely inherited from her father's side of the family, the side I barely knew, from a father I never had the chance to meet. The fear in her eyes when she received the news reminded me of the scared girl I once was. "I don't want to forget you, daughter," she whispered, holding my hand tightly. "I don't want to forget everything we've achieved together."
Fate is so ironic, testing this mother and daughter once again. Now the roles have completely reversed. The once abandoned daughter becomes the caregiver. This will be the final chapter in their journey of reconciliation, a journey both painful and deeply meaningful, closing a full circle of forgiveness and love.
In the following years, our roles reversed. I, who was once the daughter she couldn't protect, now became the caregiver she desperately needed. David, always my safe harbor, reorganized our lives to accommodate this new reality. We adapted our house, hired caregivers for the times we were working, and created routines that helped lessen her confusion. It was a painful journey, watching her gradually lose her memories, her skills, the very essence of who she was. But they were also years of a deep connection we had never experienced before. In her moments of lucidity, we talked about the past, not just about the horrors we lived through, but also about the small joys we managed to find even in the darkest times. "Remember that time you made a cake with whatever was in the pantry, and it came out so hard we used it as a doorstop?" She would laugh, her eyes momentarily clearing. "Or when we got that stray kitten and hid it from Frank for 3 whole weeks. These shared memories, even the simplest ones, helped to heal old wounds we didn't even know were still open. It was as if, faced with the threat of losing all her memories, we could finally look at the past with a new perspective, seeing not only the pain but also the resilience, the moments of connection that survived despite everything. My mother passed away in 1997 on a quiet Sunday afternoon. She was sitting on our porch, watching my children, her grandchildren, playing in the garden. Suddenly, she smiled, stretched out her hand as if greeting someone only she could see, and closed her eyes for the last time. The doctors said it was a quick, painless aneurysm. I like to think that in her last moment, she might have seen my father coming to get her, that man with the guitar whom I never knew but whose blood runs in my veins. Her loss left a huge void, but also a strange sense of completeness. Our circle had closed. The mother who couldn't protect me as a child had received my protection in her final years. We had, somehow, healed each other. Today, at 75, looking back at the legacy I've left, sometimes I can't quite believe it myself. It's not the nationally renowned clinic or the therapy methods that bear my name. My true legacy is my 2 grown children, a son and a daughter, who are out there healing others every day in their own ways. It is my 4 grandchildren, playing freely in this garden, growing up surrounded by love, without ever knowing the ghost of fear that shrouded my own childhood. My legacy is every time I sit down with a patient, I can look them straight in the eye and say, "I understand." And when I share a piece of my story, I don't speak as an expert, but as a fellow traveler, someone who has been to the darkest of places and found the way out. And it is because I know how many people are out there, suffering in silence, that I decided to tell my story today. To you, the one listening to me right now, who feels like your world is collapsing, that this pain is endless, I want you to hear this clearly. You are so much stronger than you think. The darkness will recede. There is always a way out, no matter how distant it may seem now. I don't just believe that. I know it, because I have walked that very path. From a grave beneath the rain, I have stepped onto the podium. From a trembling victim, I have become the healer. If this story has touched you, even just a little, please help me spread it. Please leave a like, so the algorithm knows that stories like this need to be heard. Please comment below, even just a simple hello, so I know I'm not speaking into a void, and so we can all see that we are part of a strong, vast community. Please subscribe to this old lady's channel and follow us on other platforms so you don't miss a single story. And most importantly, please share this video. You never know. It might just reach the one person who truly needs to hear it right now. Always remember, your life story does not end on its most painful chapter. There are still blank pages ahead, waiting for you to write a new chapter filled with more light, more love, and more meaning than you ever dared to dream. With all my love,